All right, this video will cover Chapter 14 of Groundwork for a Better Vocabulary. You can open up to page 104 if you want to follow along in your book. Here's the word for the chapter. Let's go ahead and read through these and take a guess at the parts of speech. So we have approximately, and clue here is the ly at the end. Consistent, cope, evaluate. It's 8 sound, not et, evaluate. Phrase, plea, practical, random, significant, and soul. So there's only really 2 we can easily guess, approximately and evaluate. All right, so let's take a look at the first one. So this is approximately, and this one is an adverb ending in the ly. A month is approximately 30 days long. The suspect in the murder case is a dark-haired white woman who's approximately 40 years old. So approximately means about or around or almost. So it means almost, but not exactly, more or less. So on page 105, it's number 2. But approximately is used to mean that something is almost, but not completely. Or exactly something. So in the first one, we say that a month is approximately 30 days long. So most, well, I think maybe 6 out of the 12, I'm not sure, of the months are 30 days long. But there's also ones that are 31 days long and 29 days long, or 28 days long, February. In the second one, she says she's approximately 40 years old. It's not exactly, but it's close, more or less, something. All right. So our next one here is consistent, and this one is an adjective. To be rated number 1 in tennis, a player must be a consistent winner, not a winner only sometimes. I would rather work for someone with a consistent manner than someone who is full of praise one day and screaming insults the next. So what consistent means is it means steady. So on page 105, it's number 9, steady or regular. So when we're talking about a person or a behavior or a process, with consistent we mean is that that something is unchanging in its achievement or its effect over a period of time. So consistent means that someone is acting or behaving in the same way or succeeding in the same way, not just once, but over a period of time. So for example, in the first one, for the tennis player to be considered the best tennis player one time, they have to win many times over a period of time. In the second example, I think we'd all prefer to work with someone whose behavior is the same from one day to another. Even it's better to have someone who's always mean rather than to have someone who's mean one day and who's nice the next, because then exactly what to expect from someone. So consistent has this meaning of things being the same, being about the same over time. All right, so our next word here is cope, and cope is a verb. The death of a loved pet is hard to cope with. I read an interesting article on how to cope with difficult people. So cope in this case means to handle. And one thing to keep in mind here is that after cope we see the preposition with. So these two words will go together. So cope means to handle something, but really it means to handle something that is difficult, or to deal with something that is difficult. On page 105, it's number 5, and the first definition it says is to deal with difficulties. So when you're coping, in the first example, you're coping with the death, right? Death of a pet, right? So you're dealing with something that's difficult. In the second example, it's talking about coping with difficult people. So again, it's something that's difficult. But cope also has this meaning of that not just you're handling it, but you're handling it effectively, that you're doing it in a good way. Another way to think about cope is the word manage. To manage something. It means that even though you have this difficulty, you're still able to be successful. You're still able to keep on going. So if you cope with death, it means that you feel sad, but you keep on going with your life. If you don't cope with it, it means that you're not being successful, right? You're not continuing to move on with your life. Okay, so our next one here is evaluate, and evaluate ends with that 8 sound, and that tells us that it's a verb. So reading movie reviews can help you evaluate whether a film is worth seeing. Several long-distance phone companies make the same promises, so it's hard to evaluate which is best. So evaluate means to judge. Now, if we look at the word evaluate, or if we listen to it, because the spelling is different, but in the middle of that we have value. And value means how much something is worth. So when we're talking about evaluating, and this is a definition on page 105, is that we're deciding on the value of something. Now, this value could be a monetary value or a money value. But the value could be also about how good or bad something is. So in the first case, it's saying that if you read these movie reviews, you'll be able to tell whether or not a movie is good or bad. In the second one, it's talking about evaluating phone companies, right? You want to be able to tell whether something is good or bad. Evaluate can also mean to form an idea of the amount, number, or value of something. In a sense, it could be related to analyze, but it really means to analyze specifically to tell whether something is good or bad, or worth a lot or not worth a lot, or something like that, to really to analyze something, to be able to come up with the value of it. So moving along, the next one is phrase, and phrase is a noun. So the phrase at this point in time can be reduced to a single word, now. The phrase Tom, Dick, or Harry means any member of the general public. So what a phrase is it's a word group. In grammar, we use the word phrase as opposed to a clause. So for example, we've talked about dependent and independent clauses. And what a clause is a group of words, but it has a subject and a verb. A phrase is just a group of words. So a phrase can be a noun phrase, where it's just a group of nouns. It could be a verb phrase, where it's a group of verbs. It could be also an adjective phrase, where it's just a group of adjectives. But a phrase really just means a group of words. But most of the time, it's a group of words that express some specific concept. So in the first one, at this point in time, the concept that it's expressing is now. In the second one, Tom, Dick, or Harry is a phrase, and it just means anybody, not a specific person, anybody in the general public. So on page 105, phrases number 10. So it says a group of words with a meaning, an expression. Okay, so it's not a sentence, but it's a group of words that has some specific meaning. Okay, so moving on to our next one. This one is plea, and plea is also a noun. The parents of the missing baby made this plea to the kidnapper. We beg you to return our baby to us unharmed. Please do not cut it too short, the way you did last time. Eileen hoped the hairstylist would listen to her plea. So plea is an urgent request. Now, a plea is oftentimes an urgent request for something that that's emotional, right? That's a deeply felt or an emotional one. The word that we've learned before that's similar to this is the word appeal. So it's a serious and emotional request for something. Oftentimes it's a request for something that you don't really have any control over getting what you want. So a plea means that you're asking for something that you really need, but you can't really get on your own. So in the first example, the parents of the missing baby, their plea, their request is don't hurt the baby. But the parents can't really do anything to make that thing happen. In the second one, it's a little bit weirder to call it a plea, but she's asking the hairstylist to not cut her hair too short, because the hairstylist, the person cutting her hair, is the one who's in control. Eileen doesn't have the control. Of course, Eileen could go to a different barber, but that's a different issue. But a plea means that you're really requesting something emotionally important to you, but you don't really have the power to control the outcome. Okay, our next one here is practical. And practical is an adjective. Mom put old socks to practical use as dust rags. The two single friends realized it would be practical to move in together and split the rent. Practical means sensible. On page 105, it says useful and sensible. It's number 7. But when we're talking about practical, we're saying it's of or concerned with the actual doing or use of something rather than with theory and ideas. So practical means that that it's something active or something that makes sense to do in the real world rather than just in your head. So for example, there's sort of two different meanings here, right? In the first one, we say putting the old socks to practical use, meaning that you're actually using you're using the socks for some real use in real life that's going to help you. In the second one, it's a slightly different one. We're saying two single people should move in together just because it makes sense. It's the smart thing to do, right? So we have two slightly different meanings of this. So in the first one, we're saying to put something to practical use means to use something in a useful way. In the second one, we're talking about being practical is sort of being smart about something, to use something in sort of a smart way. So our next one here is random, and this one is also an adjective. We studied two paintings in art class. One was clearly organized arrangement of black and white dots. The other seemed to be random, a collection of spots and streaks of brilliant color. The movement of clouds may seem to be random, but scientists know that there is a pattern to how they move. So random means without order. On page 105, random is number 3, not having a plan, purpose, or pattern, by chance. Okay, so one of the words we talked about before is a couple of words. We talked about frequency and we talked about interval. And we said that frequency was the rate at which something happens. So we talked about our homework, the frequency being 2 times a week, right? So that every Monday and every Thursday we know that we have homework. Okay, and we talked about interval being the space between those two things. So either the interval would be 2 days or 3 days between those things. Okay. We also talked about the word consistent in the last chapter, and consistent means steady, meaning that something is staying the same. So random is sort of the opposite of all of those words. So when we say frequency, if we know the frequency of something, we can predict when it's going to happen. If we know about what is the interval between two things, we can predict what is going to happen. If we know that someone's behavior is consistent, we can predict what's going to happen. But random means that you can't predict what's going to happen. It means that things are happening without order, without consistency. It's number 3 on page 105, not having a plan, purpose, or pattern by chance. Basically, another meaning of this is that it's made or done or happens or chosen without a method or constant decision. So, for example, the first one, the painting, we're saying that the painting looked random because it doesn't seem that there's any plan for where to put these spots of color. If we look at, I don't know that this is the greatest example, but if we look at the movement of clouds, it may seem that they just move in any order. But the thing is if we were to go to the grocery store, for example, if we were to, be very random in what we were to choose, it would be like if we went through and we had our eyes closed and we just pulled off things from the shelf, okay, without any order. If we were, if you were to choose your classes at random, you wouldn't find out any information about what the courses were. You just sort of blindly pick what the classes that you were going to have. So random has this meaning of there's no plan behind it. There's no consistency behind it. And also when something is random, it means that we can't really make any sort of prediction about what it's going to be like in the future. All right, so our next word here is significant, and this is also an adjective. Tehran's factory job was hard but worthwhile because he earned a significant part of his college expenses. Doctors have found that a good attitude can play a significant role in helping people recover from diseases. Significant means large. Okay, but be careful about this. It doesn't really. It really means significant, large in the sense of just big, right? So we wouldn't say, oh, that's a significant boy, meaning that boy is very large, or that dog is significant. Significant means large in importance, meaning that it has a big significance, or it has a big amount, or it has an important amount. So, for example, we can say significant in the sense of the amount of homework. So, for example, we could say in this class you get a significant amount of homework, meaning that it's a large amount of homework. But we're not going to use significant to describe something that's large. So, for example, like I said before, but we're not going to say the house, I live in a significant house, meaning I live in a large house. We won't use it that way, but we can use it to mean a large amount of something. The other way that we can use it is for importance, something is important. So in our first example, we say a significant part of his college expenses means a large amount of his college expenses. In the second one, we're saying a significant role, meaning an important role in it. So it can mean something that is an important part of something, or something that is worthy of extra attention. Okay, so we have these two meanings: one of large amount, and the other one meaning of importance, a great deal of importance. All right, so our last word here is soul, and soul in this case is an adjective. After her husband died, Ramona became the sole supporter of a large family. The sole reason my cousin ever calls me is to ask for money. Sole means only. So when we talk about sole, we're talking about the one and only. meaning that there's nobody else. So in the first example, right, the sole supporter means that she's the only one, right? There's nobody else. There's no other reason. Okay, so it doesn't just mean one, but it means the only one. There's nobody else. In the second example, right, the sole reason, right, the cousin ever calls. There's no other reason, right? The only reason is to call, is to ask for money. If you look at the picture, we see the sole skier. It means there's nobody else, right? The only one, the one and only. All right, so go ahead and finish off the questions that you have and do the online activities as well. And then bring any questions that you do have to class. All right, take care. See you then. Bye.